Hello, mental health enthusiasts. Welcome to Ultimate Potential, a mental health podcast. I'm Tony.
And I'm Craig.
And today we will be talking with Dr. Ryan Anderson, one of my favorite people. Just before we kick off, I do want Ryan to tell us a little bit about himself. But Dr. Ryan Anderson is someone I've known for maybe 20 years. He's a close friend and a great colleague, brilliant. He's one of these people that knows a little bit about everything. He's like Google in the form of a person, and he knows a lot about many things. Most of which, or much of which, has to do with how mental health and technology merges together, and how it can enhance our lives, enhance our mental health, and how it can be damaging.
Most introductions to Dr. Anderson have to do with knowledge and specialties, intellectual, whatever it is, because he's so well known for that. But the highlight of Dr. Anderson is his heart. And so that's why he's loved so much. It isn't because he's like a walking artificial intelligence. It's more like that he is a very genuine, good soul, and well respected and well loved. So,
Agreed.
Welcome to our podcast.
Welcome.
Well,
Yep.
thank you very much. I'll tell a little bit about my background. I'll give a little bit about sort of two different parts of my background that I think are pertinent to our topic today. So most people know about my career in mental health if they know me. I started off actually working as a victim advocate intern, working with abuse victims. And then as I kind of developed my clinical abilities, I spent some time working in medical family therapy, working specifically with cancer patients and their families. And that was really, really fulfilling work, and also, you can imagine, really challenging work.
Yes.
Gave a lot of perspective on life. From there, I went and spent about 6.5 years as a wilderness therapist, and that's where I first became acquainted with Tony. And then I came and joined Telos, and I've been working for Telos and Telos U for about 10 years now.
Yep.
And I have really, really enjoyed working with our students. I've particularly taken a great interest in working with people on the autism spectrum, people who are neurodivergent in a variety of ways. So that's my actual professional career. And then I have a side gig. I used to do this a lot more when I was younger, but to try to not starve while I was in college, as is an important goal, one of the things I did is I became involved in video game development. And I first started off as a voice actor because I had zero skills in programming or anything like that. But from there, because there were other needs that kind of came up, I learned about a little bit of coding and debugging and user experience and writing. And so I knew a lot about voice acting and just enough to get myself in trouble with everything else. And I think I ended up working on about 24 different projects, some of which actually are published and still around today.
Okay.
But with that, what was very interesting for me is I was doing that at a time when the video game industry was really transforming, when the idea of online games and microtransactions and the utilization of purposeful mechanics designed to create what I would say is excessive usage were a part of what was becoming mainstream in video game design. And so I was learning about that while I was also going through graduate school and learning about the human mind. And that led me to make a bunch of connections all the way, 25 years ago, that now I'm hearing a lot more people talk about. It's become more public knowledge. You're seeing specials on it on Netflix and other things along those lines. So I'm really glad to see a lot of this knowledge becoming much more widespread. So that's kind of where my interest in the interplay between digital media of all kinds and humans of all kinds came from.
Okay.
So Governor Cox, the governor of the state of Utah, has passed a law and is getting ready. Utah, the state, is getting ready to sue the big social media platforms for essentially damaging our children and youth and creating a mental health crisis, or at least contributing to it. Because of when you were talking about early on, you saw these games building in certain features that create a dependency or an addiction. I would imagine that that is continued, and that's really what runs a lot of the big social media platforms.
That's where the money is. It's amazing. They've honed in the psychological aspect of it so much. Where, on the one hand, you have a lot of games that are free to play, which are not free. Where you can ask, you'll spend hundreds of dollars on microtransactions, but they've learned how to get you at just the right moment, and ask for just the right amount to keep you paying out. Or with social media, they've learned a lot about it's you they're selling on social media, your time and your attention. That's what allows them to charge for ads. And so they've learned just how to keep you coming. And unfortunately, they found that extremist material, stuff that gets you angry, upset, or gets you depressed, that gets people to stay longer, because if you're feeling good and things are going well, you tend not to hang around. You tend to go and do other things. That wasn't necessarily the way it started. I want to be clear. I'm not accusing these people of coming out and saying, let's make people depressed and make money off of them. But over time, the algorithms learned that this was the way to accomplish their goal. And so we have to be aware that unless we're very intentional in how we navigate that, pushing us towards anger, extremism, polarization, depression, judgmentalism, prejudice, those are the parts of us that are most easily played upon by these dynamics. And that's how these algorithms make their money.
It's interesting. I've listened to a few documentaries and interviews of many of the founders of these companies that are now multi-billionaires, but won't let their kids or themselves, and many of them have walked away from it or quit or trying to get the whole thing shut down just because of the damage that it's doing to our culture, our society, but really to individuals, right?
Yeah.
To people that we love.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. And I've watched that happen both on a professional level, but also on a personal level. Some people very close to me, I've seen them be transformed in some pretty horrifying ways, very heartbreaking ways.
Speaking of that, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what you see as everything we're talking about, this technological movement. What is its impact on mental health?
So one thing I want to be clear about is it has multiple impacts. There are absolutely some very positive things that can happen. As far as collaboration, there are ways in which people can, in fact, meaningfully connect and use technology as an assistant in that. So when we talk about the problems, I don't want to make it sound like nothing goes right. There is some good. The problem is the general societal trend is that the parts that have a negative impact are much larger, move much faster, and have kind of become the social norm. So a lot of the things that we find, some of the things that are most concerning for me is, one, people are reprogramming the way their brain works by living in a world that works off of micro snippets. So we learn to think fast and we learn to think shallow.
Shallow, yeah.
And the thing is, that doesn't just follow us on the internet. Anything you do repeatedly becomes your brain's process for how it does everything. One of the best books on this subject is called The Shallows, What the Internet is Doing to Our Brains, and it shows some really, really good research on that. So what we're finding is that people in general are becoming more confident on weaker information. They tend to think shallowly when they think they're thinking deeply. They tend to polarize. So people who think differently, they more and more see as enemies or somehow lesser or worse. And that people are also, they're attenuating their attention span. Actually, there was a very fun piece of research from Microsoft itself that showed that the average attention span of a person in America is now shorter than the average attention span of a goldfish. And that's because of the way we're using our brains. So we are shaping ourselves in the way that we do this. And along with this as well, we're also finding never have we had generations coming up that are more anxious, more isolated, and more lonely.
Yeah.
So one of the things we're finding is that while people say, well, I use video games or social media to cope with my emotions, one thing that's very clear is they're not coping.
Right.
It's entertainment or it's distraction, but it's not coping. But
Right.
when we think this is our way of coping, what we're finding is we're actually having an atrophy around
Yes.
our emotional abilities. We think we're connecting, but it lacks the full range of the biopsychosocial impact of person-to-person connection. And so all of our attachment needs are only kind of glazed over instead of actually being met. And so the problem is we have a world of people where social anxiety is being trained.
Yes.
Just ask a teenager to make a phone call and you'll see what happens, right? We're in a world where people's ability to manage emotions is being diminished. We live in a world where we can't tolerate differences, where we're regressing from our ability to live with people from different backgrounds and to coexist with people who think differently than we do. And we're living in a world where also there's a physical health impact, the huge opportunity cost of not sleeping,
Right.
not exercising, not getting out and getting sunlight,
Not eating.
so
Yeah.
not eating.
Literally. Yeah.
You know, hydration tends to go down the tubes as well. And so there's a whole range of effects that we can look at and see. The problem is they've kind of become societally normal. So as we look at them, it's hard for us to say, hey, this is something to be concerned about. It's easier just to say that's just the way things are right now. It's kind of like walking into McDonald's and thinking if you order what everyone else is ordering, you're ordering something healthy.
Right.
You know, it's the same kind of societal mutual self-deception going on.
So Ryan, bringing it down into a family structure,
Yeah.
right? You're going to have both online deniers and cultural deniers, and a lot of people really quick to defend
Oh, yeah.
because look at so-and-so who's just graduated with a medical degree and loves to play video games. Look at all my friends. Look, and we're all functioning. We all have jobs. We all, right? People are saying this. The young
yeah.
adults and the young teenagers. There's still a bell curve of quality, bell curve of success, bell curve of whatever. And just like something like alcohol, right? Where if you're genetically, German, for example, versus Native American, for
Right.
example, you're going to have a proneness, a biological built-in generational proneness of either alcoholism or not alcoholism, right? And so,
Yeah.
so your advice to a family, what are the warning signs that my child, whether my child's 9, 13, or 23, what are the warning signs of tech addiction and serious stuff? And what's your advice to those parents?
Sure. So what I'll do is I'm going to provide a little bit of a framework to
Okay.
answer the question, and then I'll answer the question.
Okay.
So we have to recognize that tech addiction, first of all, problems with tech don't start when you're addicted. Just like people can have difficulty with alcohol before they're an alcoholic,
Right.
there can be challenges coming from technology before we're actually tech addicted. When we take a look at tech addiction or addictive potential, there are 3 factors we're looking at. One, we're looking at a person's individual vulnerabilities.
Okay.
For example, is this someone who's feeling socially isolated? That's a risk factor.
Okay.
Is this someone who has propensity towards anxiety? Does this person have ADHD? Do they have a learning disability? Are they struggling in some area of their life? So you look for those psychosocial vulnerabilities.
So if you've got a kid that's like super healthy, super active, he loves to go hiking, he's out with his friends a lot, but he still loves video games, maybe not.
Then you wouldn't necessarily worry. For example,
okay.
one of the things we find is that people who play video games with their friends and also do other things with their friends, when they do that, the video games actually help with those biopsychosocial bonds.
Okay.
But when all they do is play video games with their friends, especially online, then all of those other pieces are missing. So it can be a part of this balanced breakfast, as they
Right.
used to say.
Right.
But when it's all you have, then that's where you see problems.
Okay.
Right. So you're looking at those psychosocial vulnerabilities. That's the first set of factors you're looking at.
Okay.
The second set of factors you're looking at has to do with the technology they're using itself. How many of those dark mechanics does it have?
Okay.
Right. So, for example, if it's loaded with things that are designed to suck them in, to keep them on, to keep them going, the more of those that are present, then the more likely that thing is to be problematic. Whereas if it has fewer of those dynamics, it's less hooks on the line, right?
Mm-hmm.
So give us be brave.
And give us one.
Give us like here's the blacklist. This is the super addictive
Oh boy.
one.
Well, there's a couple that I would throw out there, and this was some of my early research. So one, when you have some kind of a game or a social media platform where it's always going and playing even when you're not there. So you literally are missing out if you're not on. So it's like the endless scrolling of social media.
Yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Or it's an online game where the game's going on, progressing, other people are leveling up.
Mhm.
And if you're not there, you're not only
You're
not
behind.
keeping up, you're literally falling behind. You're
Yeah.
worse off not playing than playing, right? Not going
Yes.
on. So that infinity aspect is one that you're looking at.
Okay.
Another one I would throw out, and there's several. One is this idea of operant conditioning. There's so many ways where they give you these little teeny tiny rewards, but they do it just at the moment where they know you're beginning to flag in your interests, so they give you something to make it fresh and new.
Mhm.
There's lots of ways that social media and video games both do that. Another is they manipulate flow states. Flow states feel amazing. You're in the groove, the adrenaline's moving, and you get right to that point where they interrupt it, where it would be most aggravating.
Yeah.
And then they ask you, okay, now you've got to complete this other quest, or now you've got to pay for this microtransaction. So these are a couple of them, but there's probably at least 40 or 50 that have been identified, probably longer than we have. Although I do have a list of some heavy hitters in one of the books that I published, Screen Savvy, Creating Balance in a Digital World. I go through and I hit like the top 12.
Okay.
So if you wanted more info, that's something you could look at.
Okay.
So you're looking at what are those mechanics, and is this person engaging with something with a lot of those mechanics? The third factor is a little bit harder to be intuitive, but what is the fit between that person's vulnerabilities and those specific mechanics that they're engaging in? So for example, let's say you have someone who's on the autism spectrum, and one of the things that their brains often like, for many people, is repetition and patterns.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are a lot of games that are designed with something called level grinding, where there's a repetitious task that you do over and over and over again, and then it gives you a reward at intermittent intervals throughout. If you are someone with an autistic mind that thrives off of that,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a lot of that mechanic in what you're using, then the level of fit for you is huge.
Yeah.
And so you take a look at the level of fit, the personal vulnerabilities, and the specific mechanics at play, and that gives you the addictive potential. So that's the framework. One of the things that you can look at, like the warning signs of tech addiction, one is you're going to see that this person's interest in anything besides technology is waning or even becomes non-existent. You're going to see that outside of gaming, they tend to feel stressed, impatient, impulsive. So they're showing signs of withdrawal when they're not having access to it. They need longer and longer periods of exposure to be able to feel like they've got enough. Oftentimes you'll begin to see sleep being disrupted. They'll stay up late into the night. They'll have difficulty with waking up in the morning. A lot of times the important tasks in their life will either, the quality will go down, like in schoolwork or at work. You'll often find that they'll start sneaking tech, that their emotions around it will be highly defensive, and that essentially it becomes the core driving motivation of their lives.
Mm-hmm.
It oftentimes becomes the one thing that they socialize about and the one thing they want to talk about. So those are all things. Now that's an overt tech addiction.
Right.
There are people, just like in any other kind of addiction, where they do a really good job of functioning on the surface, but underneath, this is just kind of every moment or everything going on, they're just cramming that in. And it's just waiting for a moment where things split and they just can't keep the house of cards standing up anymore.
Okay.
But those are some of the general signs you'd look for.
As you were going through those signs, disrupted sleep, sneaking tech, I'm sitting there imagining all the parents out there that are going down the list going, check,
Yep.
check,
Yep.
check. Or all the spouses, right, saying, oh, my spouse, check, check,
Yeah.
or even me, right? I just want to throw something out there. When you were talking about how people think they're getting their needs met
Yeah.
through these mechanics and through technology, but it's like a low nutrition.
Yeah.
I'm reminded of back in the 1980s in this area, there was a really, really bad winter. And all the deer up in the mountains, the snow was so deep they had nothing to eat. So they came down closer to the cities and the valleys, and people felt sorry for them because they were skinny. And so they brought straw and hay up into the canyons and put out all these bales of hay. And the deer would come down and they would eat this hay. And come to find out, most of these deer ended up dying anyway with bellies full of hay because they had filled their bellies with something that didn't have the nutrition
Right.
that they needed. So their hunger was satiated, but they were still starving. And I'm just thinking of people who are deeply addicted to tech who may have a belly full of hay, but they're starving. They don't know it.
Yeah. I think that's an excellent analog. In some of the clinical work I've done, these are the things that you have to keep in mind. I'm thinking of one particular young man that I worked with here at Telos, and his whole life was technology. Wouldn't leave his room for weeks or months on end sometimes. And I remember when he and I were talking about this, especially the social piece, there's this moment where he said, people always say that face-to-face relationships are better. He's like, none of mine have been. I'll tell you that right now.
No.
Yeah.
And one thing we knew is, okay, there was going to be no way for him to have this get better unless he found some way to feel like having a face-to-face relationship with someone could be positive. So it's easy to look at the tech and just blame the tech. But we need to look at the person and say, what are their struggles? Because if we're just telling them, look, you've got to get off the tech, go outside and touch some grass or something, that's not where the solution is found either. There's a reason they got pulled in. And those reasons are something they often need help with, something they don't know how to do on their own.
Do
Yeah.
you think this is possibly a bigger problem with people who are neurodivergent, who are on the spectrum? Many of them struggle, right, with
Yeah.
the social connections. Do you see any of that?
The research says yes, that in particular, people on the autism spectrum and people with ADHD in particular, those two groups tend to be overrepresented among people who have difficult or even addictive relationships with technology.
Okay. So
In high school, there's a social structure. There's a legal component. There's an accountability component for the school districts, the teachers, the parents, the police, like everybody. You can be addicted, like you could be kind of starving yourself nutritionally as a high school student and still function enough to get your diploma. You turn 18, but then you turn young adult, and all of a sudden, neither the parents nor the student have any expectation. There's no external pressure anymore.
Yeah.
So then they become this kind of functional teenager and move into this completely non-functioning, other than my tech addiction, young adult.
Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about that
it's-
experience.
It's interesting you should bring this up. A couple years ago, I was brought in to a group of leaders at Brigham Young University, not far from here. And this is exactly what they wanted to talk about. They were having this experience in their freshman class of people who were away from home. Mom and dad weren't there. Parents weren't there to give them that structure. And they were just losing them to technology. Their whole lives just kind of went down the tubes. And so I think, one of the things we talk about is it's very easy for structure to make something look more functional than it is,
yeah.
because the structure pushes things along. But functioning, our personal self-regulation is always context specific. I know how to survive under these particular circumstances, right? But drop me in the desert naked and with one knife and we'll see how I do.
Right.
And so this is that case of, our education system, without getting too political, was designed to make sure that people are advanced.
Yes.
That doesn't necessarily always mean that they're maturing and growing and becoming more capable. It just means that they're advanced.
Right.
And so when you get to a point where there is an assumption of a certain degree of maturity and self-regulation and self-control, we've learned that assumption is not a safe assumption to make. And so that's oftentimes where you see the wheels fall off.
Yeah.
Is once they're now in a position where there's no one else right over their shoulder to say, I'm going to try to help you regulate this, things can become profoundly dysregulated.
Well, and especially you turn 18, right? The parents, even if they want to help, they really don't have any influence or power. So
Yeah.
let's talk about Telos U, right?
Yeah.
Your employment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Our company. What kind of interventions do we do here? Give us an example or two, since we don't have time
Yeah.
to do them all, right?
And if I could just hop in, could you also talk to us a little bit about our listeners and parents at home who are thinking, I'm seeing these signs. What should they do?
yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So what do you do out there in the community and in our homes? And then what is happening at this level of care here at
Right.
Telos?
Sure. So I'll start with speaking about the community in general. If you are concerned about someone you know and someone you love and the way they're using their technology, I'll tell you what not to do. Don't immediately approach them and say, you've got a tech problem and we need to get you out there. Let's go hiking. Let's do all these other things because tech is your problem. That's the best way for them to decide that you are an antagonist and that they need to fight against you and resist. If ever you're going to start the conversation about technology, where you need to begin is seeking to understand what about it is so important to them. And not like, why is this so important to you? But there are things they are seeking, things they are experiencing, and things they're finding, even if it's only hay bales, right?
Mhm.
There are
Right.
things that they're finding that have led them to believe that this is what they need, and it's very compelling to them. And only after they see you being able to enter their world and understand, what is it I love about this? Why is this so important? What do I think would be happening if I didn't have access to this? From that point, what I have found almost in every single case I've worked with in this is that when you say, is there a downside to this? They can be open and say, yeah, there are times
Mhm.
I'm worried. There are times I have bad experiences. There are times I look at what's going on with me. So starting that way, rather than kicking down the door on the problem, joining with empathy to understand what has become so important is what will help create their openness to explore. And the other thing to keep in mind is once they've opened to explore, you need to progress step by step to take a look at what would better look like, with the understanding that recovering from an unhealthy relationship with technology is only about 10% about technology. And it's about 90% how do we help you build up these other areas of your life and work past the obstacles that you didn't know how to get past.
So instead of focusing on the problem, focus on the solution.
Right. Focus on where the problem came from.
Right.
What created fertile ground for the problem in the first place. Because other than that, it's like pulling weeds. You know, you pull it out, but if you don't do anything to the soil underneath, if you don't treat it, it's going to grow right back.
Yeah.
Right. So the same sort of thing. So at Telos, by the time someone comes to Telos, their tech issues have usually gotten quite out of control. Maybe they have failed out of school. Maybe there have been times when they've had angry outbursts, punching walls, breaking things when asked to get off of technology. And so one of the things we do here is we are consistent in starting with a tech detox. Now, sometimes it's easy to think about tech detox as being a metaphor for what we're doing, but it actually isn't. There literally is a change in neurochemistry
Yes.
that's going on. We're resetting their circadian rhythm. We are helping them begin to have other exposures. Because one of the things that's really hard for people is when they first have a tech detox, the idea that anything else could feel good or be rewarding just feels impossible.
Yeah.
And first exposure, even to something really compelling, because their brain has become so specialized for looking for dopamine and serotonin and norepinephrine in such a specific way, it's like it doesn't remember. And it needs to have enough room. So while we're doing the tech detox, we're not just having them lie up in their room and scream at the stars, although some of them might do that for a while. But we're working on helping them connect with people. We're working on activating their normal attachment stuff. We're working on actually getting outside, exposure to sunlight. We're working on re-exposing to things, but offering a lot of scaffolded support around that to reduce their anxieties and help reintroduce them to the things that they've been avoiding and the things that have been overwhelmed. But we're not just throwing them in the deep end of the swimming pool at the same time. But you'll notice a lot of it has to do with attachment, because so much of this vulnerability is about attachment.
Yeah.
That's, they often say the opposite of addiction is attachment. And there's a lot of science to show that that's quite true. So that's one intervention we might do. In fact, we will do fairly significantly. We will help educate them, help them learn about their own vulnerabilities. We'll help them learn about the world of technology and the way it's gotten their hooks out there. And as we go through the process, you start with helping them build up the rest of their lives, right? There are important areas of their life, things like, how do I progress in my work or my education? How do I manage my emotions? How do I connect to other people? How do I give myself mental stimulus? How do I deal with boredom? Like, there's all these crucial life areas that, unless you make some progress on them first, when you reintroduce technology is a little bit like a gas in the sense that it just fills up all available space. It expands to do that. But as you help them build up some of these areas, then as you reintroduce technology, you do it in a very strategic way. You start with very specific boundaries about how much and when, but also what. You're not going to start off with stuff that is just full of those mechanics that are a good fit for hooking you in. And one of the things that you're constantly looking at is you're turning the question on its head. Most people ask, how much time can I have technology per day? Well, that's an understandable question. It turns out to be the wrong question. The right question is, what matters in my life now, and what do I want in my life in the future? What does investing in those things look like? How much time and attention does that need? And when I'm doing a good job of answering that, then the amount of time I have left for technology kind of takes care of itself.
It can fill in the gaps.
It fills in the gaps, right? What I can say is the research says that for the average person, between 1 to 3 hours of recreational technology time is about what you see for people who have a healthy relationship. One of the reasons being is that you just don't have more time than that, because you're living your life and you're taking
you're
care
functioning.
of things, and you're having other rewarding things, and you're sleeping 8 hours a night, and and you're feeling good. But when you make it all about restricting hours, it's missing what it is that makes you want to restrict the hours by filling the hours and the time with these other connections.
Well, and it's similar to like the dieting science and everything else, right? When your body feels restricted on calories, then psychologically the whole mind, body, spirit connection just shuts down. That it's like it goes into starvation mode, right?
Yep.
And it's the same way with technology.
Absolutely. So here at Telos, what we're doing is we're identifying each one of those areas of vulnerability, and we're creating an approach to helping them go from what they're currently able to do to what they would need to be able to do for it to be healthy and sustainable. And we kind of wrap our team's supports around them in a very specific way, and we just have them work on one subcomponent of that at a time. One of the other things that we're doing as well, and again, it goes back to that whole relationship thing, is we're looking at the family dynamic, because families often feel like they've been taken hostage by someone's technology use, and they kind of get into survival mode. But also, one of the things we've found is that usually, one person has the least healthy relationship with tech, and they're kind of the identified patient, right? But helping the whole family reevaluate their relationship with technology and taking a look at how do we create a family culture which makes a space for technology but keeps it in its space and has us doing other things, everywhere from no one's answering their phone at the table,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or we all have at least one day a month where we're spending time together and it's not technology related, or
Right.
these small things that allow for connection and renewal. And again, some of this makes us talk about, well, how are we managing our stress? Americans are not good at managing stress right now.
Right.
We're really good at distracting ourselves and letting it build up and then having some kind of crisis.
Yeah.
And so these are some of the things that we would do at Telos as well. And we're helping people learn ways of monitoring themselves. There are other things that we do to help rebalance brains that have gotten way out of balance. For example, here at Telos, we offer personalized repetitive transcranial magnetic stimulation. It's really good at helping with the long-term effects of sleep deprivation and essentially dopamine jamming
Right.
through technology use. So there's lots of things we can do to help the body actually heal from those negative effects that have happened to it over time because of the technology
And
use.
if you want to know more about the TMS that Ryan just referred to, we did an episode on that. Just look in the feed and
Yeah.
several down, you'll see one on TMS with John Hall.
Oh yeah,
So-
it's a tremendous intervention.
So I'm wondering, number one, if listeners want to hear more from you, they want to read materials you've written or just learn more, where can they go? What do they do? And secondly, do you have any kind of parting advice for anybody struggling?
Sure, absolutely. So there's a couple resources I'll give you. I think I mentioned earlier, kind of the problem is you write a book about this and 6 months later it's out of date. My most recent book on the subject is called Screen Savvy, Creating Balance in a Digital World. There's also a couple of other authors that give some really good resources. I really like Chris Rowan out of Canada. She does some amazing work. There is Hilary Cash and Cosette Ray. They have several different books, so if you just look them up on Amazon, their work is all amazing. Especially their most recent work is here's the tasks step by step to go through in evaluating your relationship with technology and improving it. I love how user friendly it is. When you ask for sort of parting advice, I think the biggest thing when I think about our relationship with technology is saying, okay, this is trying to take something important in my life and give me a substitute for it. The biggest question is, what is that?
Mm-hmm.
And what do I need to do to take better care of that relationship, that person, that part of myself? Because otherwise we're going through life kind of anesthetizing ourselves digitally. And that does take a tremendous toll. And you get to a point where you're so far away from even knowing what fulfilled feels like, that it can feel hard to make your way back. But oftentimes the most important part is to start small, to ask yourself, okay, I know that I'm lonely or I'm anxious. I know that I don't know how to manage boredom. And rather than trying to tackle the whole thing all at once, because that's the problem, is technology teaches us to be microwave burrito thinkers, right? Stuff has to happen fast or it doesn't happen at all. Just look at how angry people get at long load screens. Ask someone to do dial-up internet now, there's going to be road rage, right?
Yeah.
But recognizing if I can learn to accept that the best things in my life are on the other side of time and on the other side of fear.
Yeah.
And I have to work through both of those for the things that will really fulfill me. When we can come to accept and embrace that, then we will find our lives are in such a way where creating a balanced relationship with technology is much easier because it's no longer void filling. It's just simply one thing among many, but it's not what we turn to save ourselves.
That's really powerful. You've got me thinking about myself now, because I have my times where I zone out in front of a streaming service, or you find yourself standing in a line and you no longer are able to just stand in lines at a grocery store. You have
Right.
to immediately pull out your phone. It feels uncomfortable to not be doing something with
Right.
tech.
Yeah, there's this socially awkward moment of being looking around and realizing you're the only person not on your phone, right? And developing that bravery to say, I'm willing to be different this way.
It's like the only
Yeah.
one at a party not holding a beer.
Exactly. Same sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Brian, thank you Thank you very much for the work that you do, for the impact that you have in this world here at Telos and in your personal life, and you are much appreciated.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
We also appreciate your knowledge and your specialty, particularly in this area. We rely on you a lot here. You know that. And so thank you. Thanks for being on our podcast today.
Yeah, it's been fascinating. To all of our listeners, thank you so much for spending time with us today, and we'll see you next time. And remember, mental health matters.
That's right.